This video deals with my first summer on the Great Lakes. But before I get into that, I want to recount another memory from high school. As I mentioned in the prior video, there were cliques of local residents versus the downriver bunch. And so the dividing line was never crossed. The twain would never meet. But that's not to be taken exactly literally, but there was an understanding, or the people, the kids from town there were friends probably from grade school too, so they had a reason to be more friendly to each other than to us dummies from 20 miles away or whatever. So the classrooms led to some melting of that division, but there were a super clique group that were the president of the class and the officers, and well, they just hung around together. Maybe there were 10 or 15 of them. Those were particularly tight, and no one entered that group. And the leader of the female side of that group was a girl by the name of Louise Rhine. She wasn't particularly beautiful, but she had a manner about her that was really attractive and, well, I guess you could call sexy, although I didn't see her in that sense for some reason. But anyway, she just was really a outspoken, articulate girl, and really smart. She was probably one of the smartest kids in the whole school. She played instruments, and she was at the head of numerous clubs and activities. She helped edit and write the Bison, the annual class book, and she was always in a leadership position. And of course she was taking Latin and math and all the tough subjects, because she was college bound, that was for sure. And her father was the owner of a cigar and tobacco shop there in town. And incidentally, I remember Dad and I going in there one time when I was still a kid, and he bought a cigar, and there was a flexible pipe or hose hanging from the ceiling, and it had a little tip on it that burned natural gas continuously. So if you bought a cigar or something there, you just walk over to that little flame and light your cigar. I thought that was pretty cool. But anyway, Louise, of course, never spoke to me, or never, I'm sure she didn't know that I even had a body or a soul. But I saw her frequently in the classroom, going from one class to another, maybe pass or something, but of course I was totally invisible to her sights. But she was a cute little girl. She wasn't very tall, but she had nice shape and always wore tight sweaters that emphasized her attributes. And well, I just thought if I could ever have a date with her, that would be the end of the world. I'd be her willing slave for the rest of my life. But anyway, she and I graduated and left there. I don't know what she did in terms of education, but she married one of the other cliquey bunch there by the name of Ed Bird. And Ed was a loud, boisterous kind of guy, smart too. He played in the orchestras and played in the band along with Louise, and he was part of that group. So our ways parted in 1947. I never saw her again until our 40th class reunion, and it was a total accident that I saw her there. After we'd eaten, and there was the usual entertainment, if you can call it that. And when that was all over, then they had an orchestra, and they cleared the tables away from the dance floor, and people danced or stood around and talked and just enjoyed the rest of the evening. So I was talking to some old friends, and I heard across the dance floor somebody call my name, and I looked over, and there was one of my old friends standing on the other side of the dance floor, and he was with some other guys I knew. So I started to make my way through the clustered tables and chairs over to where they were, and I noticed someone sitting in a chair with a heavy coat or blanket around their shoulders and sitting slumped over. I didn't pay any attention to that person, but as I passed by, I heard a voice say, "Hello, Don, how are you doing?" And I stopped and turned around and looked back, and I didn't recognize who it was. It was a good woman, a gray-haired woman, and she said, "You don't know who I am, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't." And she said, "Well, I'm Louise Rhine." And I couldn't believe it. That was the only time in both of our lives that we ever spoke together, but she knew who I was. And so I sat down next to her and talked to her for a few minutes, and I found that she had married Ed Bird. He was in the group that was talking and where I was headed, and she said she had MS, and it was pretty serious. That she was thin and unbelievably changed. She told me she never had any children, and I got the impression that she wasn't real happy with Ed, and just in a few comments that she made. I asked her what she had done, or where she had lived, and she said they lived in Pittsburgh, and Ed was in sales or marketing with some company. I heard that she died shortly after that reunion. It was really a sad ending to a really promising life, I think, and that never materialized. Well, now we'll go to the real meat of this video. But I wanted to talk about Louise because I feel sad about her and her early demise. In the winter of 1944 and 45, I was in high school. At lunchtime, my favorite pastime was to walk down the corner pool room and watch the people who customarily spent their time there play pool. Most of them were older guys that did it as a pastime, but there were a whole number of really good pool players, and it was interesting to sit on one of the high stools along the side of the pool tables and watch their techniques and their skill. I played periodically when I had any money and when the tables were available during lunchtime. I never had developed any skill, but I could at least not endanger the felt covering on the pool table. But one day I was sitting there in the spring of 1945. I heard these two young guys talking, and they were talking about the Great Lakes, and apparently they had shipped out earlier that spring after the ice broke, because the lakes normally close during the dead of the winter because of the ice. And of course the weather during the winter on the lakes was pretty terrible, so it suited everyone to have a couple months off during the year. These two guys were talking about how they'd jumped ship in Buffalo and come home, and what a good deal it was there, though, and they were thinking about going back. They mentioned that there was a big shortage of men to sail those ships, and that they didn't think they'd have any trouble getting back on, even though they'd jumped ship without being officially signed off. So it piqued my imagination and my thoughts that there's a potential for working and earning some money during the summer when they school. So the next day I walked over to the Pennsylvania Employment Commission, who had an office there, and that's where you signed up for unemployment if you were eligible or if you were looking for a job. So I asked the clerk there about this job as a seaman on the Great Lakes, and he knew about the jobs and about the potential for doing it. But he told me I'd have to go to Erie and to the office of the Great Lakes Carriers Association, and he gave me the address of it on 26th and Peach. So as soon as I could possibly leave school without failing any classes, which was a couple weeks ahead of the end of the term. So I went to Clearfield and bought a bus ticket on the Edwards Great Lakes to Sea bus line, who had service to Erie a couple of times a week. I left in the afternoon and we got to Oil City, which was about 60 miles west of Clearfield, in the evening. And the bus station waiting room was open, but the ticket counter was closed. And my connecting service to Erie, which was another 60 or 70 miles, would leave at 6 in the morning. So I was stranded in Oil City from evening to very early in the next morning. Oil City, even today, is a little town that coincidentally is where oil was first discovered in the United States and became famous for a brief period of time. And in those days, in the 40s, it was just a little town that rolled up the sidewalks at the first crack of sunset. So I couldn't find a place to stay. I didn't have any money anyway to speak of. So I had to wait in the bus station. And I couldn't lie down because they had partitions on the benches to keep you from doing just that. So I had to sit on this hard wooden bench all night long without any sleep. But I did have a little encounter there. There were a couple of other passengers waiting to go to Erie and then to Chicago. The connecting bus lines from Oil City to Chicago were through Erie. I noticed this a fellow a little older than me that was in the bus station waiting, and we began to talk, and he told me he was trying to get to Chicago and he was broke. He had his bus ticket, but he didn't have any money. He wanted to know if I'd loan him $1, and he promised me he'd pay me back when he got to Chicago because he had a job or something home. That was his home. So I gave him the $1, and then he asked me for my razor. He needed a shave. He looked pretty ragged, and so I loaned him my Gillette safety razor. And of course, wasn't any hot water or soap either. He had to use the drinking fountain for a water supply, and he managed to painfully hack off his whiskers. So we rode together to Erie, but I never saw him again. I gave him my address, but needless to say that he still owes me that buck. But anyway, I got to Erie about 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning. I had to walk from the bus station that was on 6th and State Street to 26th and Peach Street. So it was a fairly long walk, and I had a sea bag that I'd acquired, and I had my a few rags in that thing, and so I walked to the 20 blocks up to the office, and it was on the second floor of a rather narrow, tall building. Well, the building was only 3 stories high, but I had to walk up a long flight of stairs to the second floor, which were mounted on the exterior of the building. But anyway, I got up to the office there, and the fellow filled out some papers and signed me up for a job, but I had to have a Coast Guard authorization before I could board the ship. And to get that, I had to take a bus to Ashtabula, Ohio, which was about 40 miles west of Erie. I remember when I crossed the Ohio line and began to see Ohio license plates, I thought I was in a foreign country. I'd never seen an out-of-state license plate before. To the Coast Guard station there and get my, what they called book, which kept a record of the ships that I was on. The captain had to sign me on, and then when I left that ship, I had to be signed off. Otherwise, I was jumping ship, which was not a legal move. Although I don't know if there were any serious penalties, except that you might not get back on if you jump ship without authorization. The next captain might not accept you, certainly. And then it had my picture and my ID description. The church I was baptized in Winburn, Pennsylvania, burned down, and all my records, along with everybody else's, went up in smoke many years before that. And all I had then was a baptismal certificate I'd gotten from my local priest there in Frenchville. And this Coast Guard officer wouldn't accept that baptismal certificate. And so we talked about it for a little while, and the need for men on those ships was really desperate because of the wartime manpower shortage. So he said, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. He said, I can see that you're a citizen and you speak English well, and I'm going to believe that you are actually from Frenchville, Pennsylvania. And but I'm going to put question marks in the boxes that are supposed to be filled in with data from your birth certificate. So he did, and even today, if you look at the picture of my book carefully there, you'll see question marks in a whole number of boxes up on the right-hand corner. But anyway, I was satisfied with that, to say the least. And so he issued my book. I had to, of course, catch a bus back to Erie, and by that time, the Great Lakes Carriers Association office was closed. I guess I probably got back to Erie around 6 o'clock or so. I know that it was in the evening. I had a few dollars in my pocket, $2 or $3 is all I had. And I didn't have a place to stay in Erie overnight because the office didn't open until 7 the next morning, and I didn't know anybody there. So I thought, well, I'll go down to YMCA or YWCA and see if I can't get into one of those places. Because the YWCA was taking mail gifts during the war. Maybe they still do, I don't know. But anyway, I went there, and of course they were full. I was told that there was no possible chance of stop. So he said, he apologized, but he said, I can't even tell you where to go to sleep because there really isn't any place that I would recommend. So he turned around and started walking away, and then all of a sudden he turned around and came back to me and he says, maybe the city mission could take you in. And he said, it's only a couple blocks up the street from here, right near 26th and State, and not far at all from the shipping office. So I thought, boy, if I could get in there, I'd be in good shape. So I walked up there and I stepped in the doorway of this old building, rather large brick building, but very old and certainly run down at the heels, that's for sure. And I stepped into this large room, and there were quite a few men in there, maybe 15 or 20 men. They looked like bums or hobos, but anyway, when I stepped in the doorway, there was a young man standing in front of them, and he was preaching the gospel to them. And he saw me standing there, and he said, oh, look what we have here, another sinner coming for redemption, you know. And, that's the last thing on my mind. But the potential for finding a bed was primary. And of course, I would have liked to have something to eat too, but finding a shelter was the only thing I had on my mind. But anyway, he invited me to sit down, and I listened to the rest of his talk. And when he was done, he said, "Follow me, man." So we climbed up 3 flights of stairs into a large dormitory, and the beds were stacked one on top of the other, just iron frames with a thin cotton mattress on just a single spring layer. Told us to pick out a bunk that we wanted, so I went over to the window and I picked one out right next to the window. And then he told us that we were to take our bags or whatever we had and our clothing down to our underwear into this small room, and they were going to be fumigated in there. So, and he said in the morning you can get your stuff. They'll be safe in there. So he left, and he locked the door to the room. He locked us in this dormitory. I couldn't believe it he did that, but I still find it really odd. However, I didn't care that much. As soon as he left, I went back into the fumigating room and got my stuff. I got dressed, and I went back to my bed. And the other guys were all laying down already. They were ready to go to bed. But I knew that I had to be first in line in order to ship out the next day. That's the agent told me that there was a ship coming in, the SS Lackawanna, next evening, and whoever was first in line in the morning would fill the opening that they were asking men to fill. So I decided that I was going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and be the first at the top of those stairs, which meant that I had to be able to get out of that room and walk a couple of blocks over to the office. So I went to the window, and it was a narrow, tall window, and old. It hadn't been opened in, well, I don't know when, long time. And it was the windows were double hung, and they were weighted with ropes and a weight, so that they'd open easily. But I could see that the ropes were rotted away, and there wasn't going to be any help from the counterweights to open them. But anyway, I jiggled and pushed and shoved, and I finally got the window open. And when I did, well, the window was dirty to start with, and had a scum on it, and it was really hard to see out of it. But when I opened it, I saw what I really wanted to see, and that was a fire escape landing right outside that window. And so I knew that I could get out of there when I was ready to. So I laid down for a little while, and I slept maybe an hour or two, very fitfully, and I woke up, and I decided, to heck with it, I wasn't going to take a chance and oversleep. So I got up, and I tried to open that window as quietly as possible, and I got through it, and I pulled my sea bag through the opening. I couldn't open it the whole way, but it was open enough for me to get out. And I stood out there on that platform, old iron, rusty stuff. Probably nobody had ever used it. And I looked down, and I was up pretty high off the ground in a back alley. So I tried to tiptoe down the ladder and not make any more noise than necessary, but the clanking and creaking of that iron superstructure just made that impossible. But I did get down to the ladder that was hinged, that would lower when you stepped on it and get you down to the ground level. And it had big iron weights hanging from cables that held the end of it up off the street, 10 or maybe 15 feet. And that was its normal position, so that people from the ground level couldn't climb up the fire escape. So I walked out on the end of this pivoted ladder, and it wouldn't go down. It had frozen and rusted into place, and it was tight enough and had enough friction to bear me and my sea bag without dropping down to the street. And it was too far to jump. I was a little leery of jumping that far onto the pavement down below. So I started to try to jump or try to jiggle and move around. Hopefully it would break free. And it was making all kinds of noise, creaking and groaning and clanking. And I thought, sure, somebody would call the police, and then I knew I'd be in trouble. Well, I finally managed to get it to start moving, and it gradually creaked. It couldn't have made more noise than it actually did. But anyway, when it got about 4 or 5 feet above the ground, it stopped. I didn't have any hesitation about jumping off, and I started to run. I wanted to get out of that location as soon as I possibly could, so I ran with all my might out to the main sidewalk on this Peach Street there. And then, of course, there wasn't anybody around at that hour of the morning, and so I walked over to the Great Lakes shipping office, climbed the long flight of stairs to the platform, and I was number one by about 2 hours. So there wasn't any question about me shipping out. And when the agent came at 7 o'clock, I made sure that I was the first one in the office, and he signed me up and told me that the ship would arrive around 7 o'clock that evening and to be on the dock ready to board the ship. So I walked the 26 blocks plus down through the dock area and out on the landing dock. I wasn't going to take any risk missing it, but I hadn't anything to eat. That was it was getting a little bit uncomfortable. So I could see a restaurant not far from the dock up on State Street, and so I felt comfortable in walking up there to see if I could get a sandwich or something and still keep my eye on the dock in case the ship came in. I didn't realize it, but the ship was coming in with empty, and it had to be loaded, so it would be in the dock several hours while it was loading, and I had plenty of time to get on. But anyway, I bought a piece of Boston cream pie with my remaining few cents, and I remember that because I'd never heard of Boston cream pie before, and it was good. Anyway, the ship came in and tied up, and they put a long, springy ladder over the side for me. This was a big ship. It was about 500 feet long, and I had to climb that thing to get on board. I was waiting to take a cargo on, and it was light, as they call it, and I'd say that the deck probably was 50 feet above the dock. So I threw my sea bag over my shoulder and climbed that ladder and got up on deck, where there was a man waiting to direct me to the quarters where I was to stay. So we went to the forward end and down below decks to this small dormitory. There were 4 beds in there. 4 deckhands stayed in there. The shipping office had assigned me as a deckhand, so that's where my quarters were. The other entry-level jobs were as a fireman, and they were in the stern, and we never worked together or anything. So when I got my sea bag oriented, he asked me if I wanted something to eat, and that was like asking if the Pope was Catholic. He took me back to the dining room, and we entered this reasonably large room where there was a table loaded with all kinds of, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was so much stuff, so many desserts of all kinds, and meat, all kinds of meat. There was chicken and bologna and pork chops, and just all kinds of stuff stacked on various platters. And I thought I was getting ready to eat supper, and I asked him if that's the way they ate all the time, or he said this is just the snacks for the night crew. Sometimes they get hungry, and they'll come in and have something to eat. And he said, by the way, there's a refrigerator over there that's full of chocolate milk or milk, or anything else that they keep in the refrigerator. So if you want any milk or anything like that, you just help yourself. Boy, I couldn't believe it. Boy, it was a feast, I remember. But anyway, the ship got loaded, and I didn't do anything. I wasn't trained to do anything, so I had to just wait. We finally set sail and sailed out into the bay there, and I could see land ahead, and I thought it was Canada. And I asked another deckhand, "Is that Canada over there?" And he said, "No, that's the peninsula, which encircled the bay." So we went through the dredged passage out into the lake, and of course, when we got out there, I couldn't see Canada by any means. Canada was 20 or 30 miles across the water. Those are large lakes up there, and when you get out on the middle of them, you can't see land in any direction. But anyway, that started my Coast Guard deckhand career. I think this is a good place to stop this one.